Viewer discretion. Referencing a marginalized instance in fiction isn't a misrepresentation of the entire circumstance. It's simply shining a light on an aspect that exists but isn't widely addressed or acknowledged. Do not, and I repeat, please do not conflate that with misrepresentation or me taking sides. The other side of this story is very real and indeed extremely sad, and if you are a victim of then my heart truly goes out to you. With that being communicated, if you can't stomach anyone talking about the other side, no matter how rare and false you believe it to be, I kindly advise you to click off right now. Criminal UK is part of Netflix's new hit criminal franchise, which takes a unique look at the psychological warfare taking place in the interrogation room. The show is divided in 4 European countries: the United Kingdom, France, Spain, and Germany. Each country follows a series of suspects as a team of investigators try to get answers about the crime to which they are possibly connected. The whole show is shot in just 2 rooms but still manages to capture the attention of the viewer by keeping us on the toes from the moment we are allowed in to follow the drama unfolding in front of us. Episode 2 of Criminal United Kingdom is quite simply fantastic. It's an incredibly well acted, thematically relevant slice of drama that serves up a thought-provoking look at from the point of view of the accused rather than the accuser.
Where do you draw the line between a sexual invitation and harassment? Well, like a cynic would say, anything unwanted is harassment. Well, how the hell is the person who's making the offer supposed to determine that beforehand?
Yeah, you make the offer or the invitation in part to find out
whether
if
it's welcome.
wanted.
Yes, and the terrible thing about that in part is that it's almost always men who do that.
This specific episode has caused a lot of controversy amongst the viewers, particularly by the female audience. Most viewers are so used to seeing the usual "I don't like him, he must be guilty" narrative whenever a show or a movie deals with sexual assault crimes. False allegations are rare, but they're undeniably real, and up until now, nobody dared to touch the subject, at least not that I have seen anyway. So it was a breath of fresh air when they chose to bring to light the exceptions of crimes and not just the rule like most shows do, and I assume it took some courage as the backlash seemed inevitable and maybe justified depending on who you ask. What really sets this show apart is that there's no chase, no gathering of evidence, no crime scene investigation, no exposition, nor all the other tropes that we're so used to expect from a criminal detective series. Instead, we cut directly to the final stages of each interrogation. One suspect/person of interest in an interrogation room, a deadline, and a team of police detectives using the facts that they have at their disposal and a carefully strategized line of questioning to elicit a confession or enough incriminating evidence to bring legal charges against the suspect. A two-way mirror leads into the control center where colleagues guide the officers in charge of the interrogation to cues they might have missed or provide them with supplementary information that helps them frame their questions. There is a feeling of voyeurism in watching what's happening in the control room as the officers attentively observe the interrogation.
Okay, nice and simple. Let me tell you what happened, everything I can remember, in order.
In episode 2, we're introduced to Alex, who's played by Kit Harrington. We begin with Alex being interviewed about his whereabouts on that fateful night. Dressed in a blue suit, he discusses how he and the sales and marketing department went for drinks at a local pub.
So I start thinking we should leave. All of us. But then Sarah says she wants to stay, and because she says that, Andy wants to stay when Andy's too drunk to stand up.
Alex underlines that he was the one who wanted to leave, but Sarah, the accuser and alleged victim, decided against that. Instead, she started to speak about the company, and according to Alex, she and Alex continued their conversation. Alex clarifies in his testimony that she had only been at the firm for a month and had done fairly well under her brief time at the company, which Alex acknowledged, and according to him, gave her nothing but praise for what she had achieved during her brief time. Eventually, they all decided to head home, and on their way home, they dropped off one of Alex's employees, Andy.
And then there's just the two of us. And she wants to get another drink to keep talking. her suggestion.
With just Sarah and Alex left together, she kindly suggests that she and Alex should go back to his apartment for drinks. At this point, Alex is pretty vocal about the fact that she was drunk and explains to the interrogators in the room that, despite her kissing him, Alex called her an Uber, but she refused to go home.
We drink wine at mine, music. I'm on the sofa, she's on the chair, she gets up, goes to the loo, comes back in again, sits back down, but now she's on the sofa next to me.
The consequences of this sees them involved in a lovemaking session. As he finishes his story, both Tony and Natalie, the interrogators, tells Alex that they don't believe him. In the room next door, Vanessa and Paul, the two other detectives, discuss the mannerisms of their two colleagues and whether they actually really believe him or not. To better understand how innocent people can fall victim to the imperfect justice system, it's important to take a closer look at some of the important key influencers, the interrogators. In order to put themselves in the best position possible to get a confession, the interrogators of the show utilizes an array of techniques to try to put Alex either at ease or in distress so that they can use his disoriented state to lead them to a confession. One of the tools used by the interrogators is deception. Although there are laws and regulations in place that forbids the interrogators in the UK from lying about the strength of their case, it doesn't seem to stop the two interrogators, Tony or Natalie, from making misleading statements or implying that the suspect has already been implicated in the crime by someone else. We see Tony and Natalie using subtle things that work on a suspect at the level of the subconscious. The thickness of an evidence folder, the alleged information in that said folder, the slow cleaning of one's glasses, needling, negotiation, fake empathy, and ad hominem attacks. A more prevalent thing that we see is that the interrogators tend to put a lot of focus on Alex's verbal and non-verbal cues to suggest that those behaviors implicate his guiltiness or level of misogyny. The major aim of this hyper-focus is to investigate to what extent verbal and non-verbal features of liars and truth-tellers' behavior change during the course of repeated interrogation. Some studies have shown that liars display significantly fewer smiles, self-manipulations, pauses, and less gaze aversion than truth-tellers. There is no conclusive evidence that suggests that these are valid enough to be generalized or used as fit. Therefore, the premise of this line of questioning is more assumptive than factual, which is a common theme in the approach that the two interrogators seem to follow throughout this episode. As the 5-hour interrogation wears on, the conversation becomes less about reaching the truth and serving justice and more about to what degree they believe Alex to be guilty and how many accusations without context or proper evidence they can make stick. This is further depicted when Alex's own representation stops giving him the benefit of doubt and signals throughout the whole interrogation, not with her words but with her body language, that she has already decided that Alex is guilty. Looking at her more closely, one can see that she spends most of the interview leaning away from Alex, and by the final scene of the interrogation, she has already mentally switched sides from being Alex's defense lawyer to posing as his adversary in a figurative sense. She does this by choosing to sit across from him next to the detective, which also illustrates the lack of empathy for Alex's predicament given that he hasn't had any concrete evidence alluding to his guiltiness. The entire 45 minutes have you convinced that Alex is guilty and is on the verge of having a mental breakdown, and this shows the power that a false accusation can have. Again, me highlighting the fact that the accused can be a victim is not a juxtaposition to the pain that an actual rape victim goes through. Do not conflate that with me taking sides. The challenge most accusers face, whether they are guilty or not, is that by the virtue of being in today's climate of cancel culture, makes one guilty before the trial has even started.
So we're moving from a legal system where intent matters to a legal system where consequences matter, which is really the eradication of the legal system. But it doesn't matter because the postmodern radicals who increasingly occupy the law schools believe that Western law is a patriarchal and oppressive tradition, and that undermining it and destroying it by doing things like removing due process and insisting on preponderance of evidence and going for consequence rather than intent, that's fine because all they're doing is tearing down a terrible tyrannical patriarchal structure.
Most accusers, especially if they're men, lose their jobs, families, friends, and are labeled felons even after the jury has declared them not guilty. Again, the status not guilty doesn't mean that the person isn't culpable for their alleged actions. It could just be the fact that the prosecutors couldn't provide sufficient evidence.
That's it then, they believe me.
Well, they did not have sufficient evidence to corroborate the allegation made, so the result is the same.
But even in the thousands and thousands of cases where the accuser is found to be lying about the accusation or are caught manufacturing something that didn't happen, the accusers are still seen as guilty in the eye of society and have lost pretty much everything that is of value in life. Case in point, we even hear an offhand comment from the lead detective Natalie.
Turns out she'd put herself up for promotion, hadn't got it, then made an allegation of misconduct against her boss. They ended up paying her to leave.
I just don't want that to be true. I don't want any woman to be like that.
She doesn't want to believe a woman could do such a thing, which reminds us that even by trained officers who have sworn to protect and serve the law wants to forgo one of the oldest principles of the law, which is giving everyone the benefit of doubt. Instead, Natalie deemed Alex guilty until proven innocent. We have to remind ourselves that once the accused has been brought to court, we automatically think he's guilty due to our confirmational bias, and whatever attitude or anger the accused displays only further affirms our impression, just like we can see in the following scene.
There's a guy who knows what he wants, right? Assertive. And assertiveness can be attractive. Women can be drawn to that. And then there's the assertive type who is so sure of what he wants and is so used to getting it that when it doesn't happen,
He just takes it.
yeah.
The problem with confirmation bias fallacy is that informing a judgment based on a first impression neglects any other contradicting evidence that follows, which leads us to make wrong assumptions. Case in point, most of us started the episode believing Alex was guilty due to the fact that he sat in the accused chair, and if it wasn't for the immense writing, acting, and cinematography, most of us would never even entertain the fact that he could have been innocent, especially given the fact that he is confident, assertive, and a white male. With the medical report scene, it is clear that they're trying to make a message about how quickly people can wriggle out of rape charges by saying it was passionate, so the justice system is in this regard in Alex's favor, which is important to not forget. The justice system is neither completely just towards men or women, and even though it mostly favors women, this is one of the few times we actually see it favor men. Throughout the episode, we see Kyle attempting to throw his garbage in the bin but keeps on missing. I've read a couple of opinions online arriving at different conclusions about the message behind it, but here is my interpretation. I believe Kyle's attempt to throw the paper in the bin is a symbolism of the police detective's attempt to leapfrog the groundwork of actually taking the necessary steps in between to reach the truth in their dealings with Alex. Throwing the paper is akin to throwing a jump shot and hoping for the best, instead of taking the extra steps and making sure the paper, aka the accusations, are carefully treated. Furthermore, the fact that when Kyle then missed and then subsequently left the rubbish on the floor is a symbolism that they, the cops/detectives, don't always clean up after themselves or fix their own mess. The same way they didn't fix their mess or offer a solution to Alex for causing a mess in his life with the false accusations, just left it as it was, with no care in the world.
Why are women coming forward now about events that happened 15 or 20 years ago?
I feel like I wouldn't have done this video justice if I didn't touch upon the other side of this argument. It's easy to think that if someone has actually suffered harassment or sexual assault before, that the most logical and sane thing to do is to immediately file a report and go to the police. But one has to understand that it's not that black and white in reality. So before I wrap up this video, I would like to highlight some reasons for why some victims wouldn't feel comfortable coming forward after a traumatic experience like this. One of the primary reasons victims don't come forward to report sexual harassment or assault is shame. Shame is at the core of the intense emotional wounding women and men experience when they are sexually violated. Abuse by its very nature is humiliating and dehumanizing. This is especially true with sexual violations. The victim feels invaded and defiled while simultaneously experiencing the indignity of being helpless and at the mercy of another person. This sense of shame often causes victims to blame themselves for the misconduct of their perpetrator. Understanding more about the emotion of shame can help explain why victims blame themselves when they're violated and why more victims do not report sexual assault or harassment. Shame is a feeling deep within us of being exposed and unworthy. When we feel ashamed, we want to hide. We hang our heads, stoop our shoulders, and curve inward as if trying to make ourselves invisible. Most people who have been deeply shamed take on the underlying and pervasive belief that they are in some way defective or unacceptable. They feel unworthy, or worse, unlovable.
But Aaron Fisher doesn't see himself as a victim anymore. He is a track star who says he's spent close to half his life trying to outrun Jerry Sandusky.
A victim means people feel sympathy for you. I don't want that. I would rather be somebody who did something good, like a hero or something.
Understanding more about the emotion of shame can help explain why sexual assault victims blame themselves when they're violated, and why more victims do not report sexual assault or harassment. Many assault victims refuse to believe that the treatment that they endured was actually abusive. They downplay how much they have been harmed by harassment and even assault. They convince themselves that it wasn't a big deal. Other sexual assault victims are good at making excuses on the behalf of their abusers. It is often only after other victims step forward to say that they were abused by a perpetrator that a victim may realize that they were actually dealing with a serial abuser. Fear of the repercussions is a huge obstacle that victims face when it comes to reporting sexual harassment or sexual assault. Fear of losing their jobs, fear that they won't find another job, fear they will be passed over for a promotion, fear of losing their credibility, fear of being branded a troublemaker, fear of being blackballed in their industry, fear of their physical safety, and the list goes on and on and on. This is true whether it's a case of a young woman in her first job being harassed or a young kid trying to make his way into the major sports leagues.
So just to be clear, I'm now expected just to get up, walk out of here, go back to my life, back to my office, the place your colleagues arrested me, the place I was escorted out of in front of my mates, colleagues, my clients. I just go rock back up there in the morning, do I?
Getting back to Alex's predicament in the show, ultimately, the story is not about it's about justice. It all paints a picture of a justice system that gets involved with good intent, but ultimately leaves the scene messier than it originally found it, and in some way just perpetuates injustice further. The problem for Alex in this story was not that the police asked him tough questions during the interview. It was not necessarily about being accused for
You have to help me out, because whatever the truth is here, this shit sticks. That's the point.
No, the problem was that he was arrested in front of everyone from his work, including clients, loved ones, friends, and family.
I was tarnished the second your mates came into my office in their uniforms. And nowadays, not being charged with that's not enough.
And in this feminist cancel culture climate, any kind of arrest will have a long-term repercussion, especially if you're a man. And the actual nature of the arrest, aka what you are arrested for, makes little to no difference to the investigation of the truth, but makes a big difference to how any innocent person gets on with the rest of their life. As Alex noted, any guy accused of a sexual crime is pretty much guilty by virtue of being accused, at least in the court of the public opinion anyway. However, if someone is falsely accused, I guess this episode was asking, where is the justice? How does one repair one's life after something like that? Alex's outbreak in the end of the episode shows his realization that he was the victim and no one cared. Nonetheless, I'm sure I haven't captured every traumatic aspect of this very controversial and sensitive topic, and there's probably a bunch of you who don't agree with my analysis, but that's completely fine. Whether you disagree with me or not, I'd still like for you to like or dislike the video and write down your thoughts or phrase your own analysis down below, and let's have a discussion about it. Also, if you have seen this show already, don't forget to comment what your favorite moment or quote is. With that being said, if you like this type of videos, be sure to like the video and subscribe. Peace.